In the decades following World War II, a new era of frosty relationship is ushered between the greatest superpowers of the time, the Cold War. For many, that means capitalist nations pitted against the communist camp, an ideological battle between East and West, the USA versus the Soviet Union. But it isn't so clear-cut. A third party muddies the waters and brings complexity to this relationship: China. And the man responsible for this is the founder of Chinese communism itself, Mao Zedong. Mao doesn't always align himself with the Soviet Union against the US. Mao's position shifts between the Soviets and the Americans, disrupting the balance of power. For so long, China's involvement in the Cold War has been hidden from public record. Until now. Newly released Chinese archives have shed light on Mao's Cold War strategies and intimately reveal personal stories on the ground. These are the eyewitness accounts of the men and women who fought on the front lines of Mao's Cold War. The year is 1950. Gao Futian is barely 20 years old when he's sent to battle at Chosin Reservoir in North Korea in the thick of winter.
我呀，今年正80岁。我呀，到朝鲜以后是参加39军的战地救护工作。 到朝鲜呢，给我的印象最深的就是雪，满山遍野全是雪地，你根本看不到什么东西，是个雪的，还特别冷这天气，可是呢路还特别滑。在这个走山路的过程当中啊，你白天你还不能走，因为飞机轰炸你啊，你晚上还得走，晚上走啊，你东西你背不了啊。 我记得我从前面到后边，我走这一道啊，到了汉城啊，我那鞋跟都没了。
A war breaks out in the Korean peninsula between the capitalist South and communist North. Chairman Mao calls on young Chinese revolutionaries to fight for the nation. Gao and thousands of others rally around the call of party chairman Mao Zedong to help North Koreans fight against China's enemies in Korea. These are among the rarest archive images captured during the war by Chinese wartime photographers. Only recently have these been made public. Five years before the Korean War breaks out, East Asia is a sea of turmoil. It is 1945. Japan has just surrendered following the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Korean peninsula is divided along the 38th parallel between North and South, backed by the Soviet Union and the US respectively. China too is reeling from the Japanese occupation. With the end of World War II, China is thrown once again into a civil war between the US-backed Kuomintang and the Chinese Communist Party. A communist leader is on the rise. His name, Mao Zedong.
Mao Zedong attends the founding conference in 1921. A man of the soil, he believes that the ultimate power in China belongs to the peasants, who make up 80% of the nation's population.
Mao is known for his brilliant military strategies.
The military strategy of Mao Zedong took shape during the World War II and developed fully during the Chinese Civil War. between 1946 and 1949. It was called Revolutionary War, a war against imperialism and nationalism. Mao's strategy was for a total victory in both wars.
In 1949, the Red Army wins a series of decisive battles against the Kuomintang. By October that year, Mao takes control of the capital, Beijing, and proclaims the People's Republic of China. The stage is set for Communist China to face its greatest enemy yet, the Americans. On June the 25th, 1950, an incident in neighboring Korea changes the course of history. North Korean forces invade the south, advancing all the way to Pusan. The United States comes to the aid of South Korea, sending American troops to fight alongside the South Koreans. September the 15th. The Americans made a tactical decision to retreat from Pusan and launch a flank attack by sea at Incheon. US forces then pushed the North Koreans back, capturing their capital, Pyongyang, and advancing even further, almost knocking on China's door.
The Korean War broke out at a very critical time. So the United States sees that war as a kind of part of the global communist offensive.
Cold War means different things to different people. The Americans and Soviets believe the Cold War is a confrontation between the two superpowers. But Mao believed the Cold War is about China. China could be invaded by America. So Mao had been prepared a defense against perceived US invasion of China.
By entering the war, Mao hopes to lay the foundation of China as a superpower in the eyes of the world. But more importantly, Mao sees the war as an opportunity to galvanize the masses.
When Mao made the decision to send the Chinese troops to Korea, the new republic, or the People's Republic, was only 1 year old. It was a baby. It has a million problems at home. But Mao did need a few important things to consolidate his authorities. The first, political control, or established legitimacy of the Chinese Communist authority.
Mao's grip on China has yet to solidify. He desperately needs his people to believe in him.
He established a kind of a personal cult, Mao worship surrounding him. He was very confident, but on the other hand, he was nervous. He was haunted by the nightmare of many Chinese peasant rebellions. After they overthrew the old regime, they failed to hold on to the power.
Mao's vision inspired the masses. One of those is 14-year-old Song Ling, living in a village in Tianjin. She's a loyal follower of Mao, eager to do anything for the new China.
我快75岁了，我原来参加部队是66军，到8、9月份回来的时候，就是接到一个指示，就是说有一个任务，就是要选拔一些个人，起码就是说身体好的，我们也不知道到哪儿了，坐的一个就是一个闷罐子车，就我们这一个组吧，大概有个10来个人。 这个因为我们就直接就到朝鲜去了。我们在那个分配的时候就说了，就是说这几个人就编成到野战军医院去了，66军野战医院。这是没有什么系统的学习，就是有医务人员给我们讲课，大夫什么的，就是你们到那儿要执行什么任务，这个我们才知道，就是说，就是接待伤病员了。
One of the earliest battles takes place here near Yalu River. These are rare images captured by Chinese photographers that fateful day in August 1950. More than 300,000 Chinese soldiers converge on the Chinese side of the Yalu. Masked by the darkness of the night, all the 18 divisions begin infiltrating across the border.
They were under coverage, undetected. They launched a surprise attack against UN forces. Those attacks surprised UN forces. MacArthur cried and telegraphed Washington, quote unquote, "We are facing an entirely new war."
The sheer number of troops sent to the front lines is so overwhelming, the American forces coined them waves.
美国形容我们叫人海战术，一批人倒了，后边的接着又上来一批，我每一个人都是让你上，你没话讲就照上，是用生命来保卫住我，所以当时没有什么闲念的杂念啊，是吧？所以这个战争越残酷，对自己那好像也是一种鞭策鼓励啊。
For Mao, the stakes are high. Failure to eject the Americans from Korea will create insecurity for her. It's a question of survival for the fledgling Chinese Communist Party. In November 1950, China finds itself embroiled in a war of ideologies against the Americans. The battleground, the Korean Peninsula. Mao needs to prove to his people that joining the Korean War is the right thing to do. In an act of courage, Mao sends his own son to the front lines.
In order to mobilize the Chinese forces and convince the Chinese generals, many of whom did not believe China should fight war against the United Nations, Mao sent his son, Mao Anying, to Korea as a Russian translator.
But tragedy soon strikes the young Mao.
During a UN air raid, Mao Anying was killed in November 1950. Mao lost his son in the Korean War.
His son's death doesn't deter the paramount Chinese leader. If anything, it strengthens his resolve. Mao is confident of repelling the enemies. As Mao's soldiers near the 38th parallel, there's a dilemma. Should China cross the border and press ahead?
Mao was too obsessed with victory, and he was too proud of the previous victory. So, and he rushed to the most strong part of the peninsula.
But not all of Mao's generals are that optimistic. Peng Dehuai, the commandant of the volunteer army, knows the Chinese have a weak defense and is more cautious.
So during those weeks, Peng tried to convince Mao that we should adopt more cautious or defensive strategy in Korea. Mao and Stalin surprised. You're winning the war. Why you stop now? We could take over the entire Korea. We are winning the war, right? They say no. We need to build up defense.
Peng is overruled. The 31st of December 1950, the Chinese launched their third campaign against the American forces. This time, they press on towards Seoul. UN forces continue to retreat. For military medic Gao, the day he marches into Seoul is a moment to remember.
完了，咱们速度特别快走的，所以我不是说到了汉城都是那个鞋跟都磨没了吗？我们过了汉城以后，就完全不一样了，跟北方不一样了，他全坚壁清野，什么东西都藏起来了。当时啊，穿过汉城的时候，都是在夜间，关门闭户。 基本上是看不见人，就是那么个情况。有偶尔啊，周围有枪声，这样赶紧走，赶紧往前走。
But the jubilation is short-lived. The US forces push back, and the Chinese have to play defense.
Chinese forces suffered heavy casualties because of the technology between the Chinese forces and the UN forces. Chinese forces used World War II weapons from Soviet Union, some from captured Japanese-made weapons. United States and UN forces had developed advanced technology, including the jet fighters, jet bombers, rocket launchers, heavy artillery pieces, and automatic weapons. 30 or 40% of Chinese soldiers died in the Korean War were killed by the heavy weapons.
For the next 6 months, it's a stalemate. Chinese and American forces alternately gaining and losing the upper hand. The coming months will prove to be the war's deadliest yet. On the 19th of April 1951, Chinese forces launch a fifth offensive on the Americans. For the next 8 months, China and the US engage in a protracted war. 33 army divisions are unleashed. 700,000 Chinese troops on the ground fight in a series of battles near the demilitarized zone. One of the most fiercely fought, the Battle of Triangle Hill.
我们就是中国人民解放军的炮兵部队。我叫王钦啊，今年80岁，我是河北省的安平县人。你看上甘岭这个地方并不大，才4平方公里，那么为什么他们要打上甘岭？上甘岭是成为了美国的这个伤心岭啊，就在这个地方啊，因为五圣山这个是很高的一个山，所以说敌人的阵地都暴露在我们面前，他们也想跟我们争夺这个有利地性啊，对我们对他们都是至关重要， 消耗的炮弹是300发，不是300万发炮弹。那个4平方公里的一个小地方，就扛住那么多炮弹，打了以后残酷到那个土啊、那个石头都成了面了，哎，所以说，那么多的残酷，我们那个时候在洞子里头的没有水喝，因为什么？敌人要破坏我们的洞口啊，他要封锁，怎么着？他有火山火焰喷射器，烧我们，所以我们呢里边呢没有吃没有喝，就在这样境况下，我们还要战斗，有这样的艰苦。
Casualties are high on both sides. More than 100,000 have died in the battles so far. Tens of thousands more are wounded.
我们接的这个伤员吧，基本是从前线已经都经过简单的这个止血了，有急救包了什么的，到我们这儿来吧，就是一个运转，好像是一个运转的站。在这一间屋子里头吧，没有多大，知道吗？这个都是对着这么什么的，这边躺着一个人，这边躺着一个人，他们的那个脚吧。有的那什么，有的是胳膊什么的，那都给他们都得岔开了。因为什么？你迈步的时候吧，你不小心不是踩了他们的胳膊，就是踩了他们的腿了，是吧？那个环境是非常恶劣的，知道吧？这些伤员很痛苦。
Mao devises military principles that he feels will ensure success in the field. Among them, to attack isolated troops with a strong force, to go on an offense, to seize weakly defended cities, and to refresh troops between battles.
During the first two campaigns, from October to November 1950, those tactics worked. UN forces suffered heavy casualties, but later on, those tactics failed to achieve the goal of driving the UN forces out of Korea. UN command realized the shortage or weakness of Chinese forces. UN command called it 7 days a week offensive campaign to characterize the Chinese supply system. So the average soldier could carry on supplies for 1 week. So that's all they got for their next campaign.
Initial success soon gives way to disappointment. May the 23rd, Mao's fear turns to reality. The Chinese 180th Division is almost totally wiped out in an all-out siege. Marshal Peng Dehuai again tries to signal caution to his leaders in Beijing. But his warnings fall on deaf ears.
When Peng rushed back to Beijing for more aid and support, he was upset. And he saw the party leaders in the middle of a dancing party. It was Saturday night, everybody had fun. And he was really upset and yelled out, "We are dying, fighting in Korea, and you guys still having party at home. What can I tell my soldiers?"
With no clear winner on either side, both Mao and the US consider a truce seriously. But peace isn't going to come so easily. The Korean War has dragged on for more than a year since the first gunshots are fired on the 25th of June 1950. But neither China nor the US is winning the war. With a stalemate, both parties agree to come to the negotiating table, but Mao does so half-heartedly.
Negotiation and the fighting are always two handles in Mao's strategic thinking. When you fight, you are created a more favorable position for you come to the negotiation table. So when you negotiate, actually you are buying time.
One issue proves to be a major obstacle: treatment and exchange of the prisoners of war. Throughout the Korean War, over 50,000 troops have been captured as prisoners on both sides. One of them is soldier Jiang Qing-chun. In April of 1953, he and hundreds of others are held captive. But Jiang is hit by tear gas and soon loses consciousness. When he comes to, he finds himself in a truck as a prisoner of war. Army correspondent Hong Lu has written many articles on the plight of these captured soldiers. One of those he's profiled is POW Jiang.
蒋庆全这个英雄啊，战斗中间吃那么多苦，被俘以后受了很多罪啊。
According to archives, some of these Chinese prisoners of war are given tattoos on their bodies. These tattoos are anti-communist slogans aimed at shaming these POWs, making it hard for them to be assimilated back in China. Jiang is among those tattooed.
要给他身上刺字，他说你把我胳膊砍了，你愿刺什么？长到我胳膊身上，我就不让你刺。
These POWs may not have realized it, but their fate lies in the hands of negotiators between the US, China, and to an extent, the Soviet Union.
POW issues became the major problem during the Korean War negotiations. Chinese and North Korea demanded a total repatriation of their POWs to their country. That means UN forces had to return all the Chinese and North Koreans back to their home country. But the UN command believed that each prisoner had his own choice, his own willingness for their own repatriation.
The POW issue remains unresolved for the next 2 years. This hardline stance on Mao's part is because of his close relationship with the leader of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin.
Stalin was happy to see the American and UN forces was bleeding on the Korean battleground. As Soviet Union benefited from the Korean War, not just undermine the US authority in the world, and also Stalin could sell more weapons to China. So Stalin insisted a better term for the communist parties. He liked to see more fighting for his political goal.
In March of 1953, Stalin dies. With the Soviet leader's death, Mao begins reassessing his priorities. By June that year, both China and the US are ready for a compromise. A decision is reached on the status of POWs. The armistice between China and the US is signed on the 27th of July, 1953. Correspondent Hong Lu is in the front lines when he hears that the armistice will kick off at 9 p.m. on July the 27th. But the hours leading to that are intense.
一到前线了，那个炮弹呐，炮弹轰炸就不断了。在那个以前呢，那个到处都是火海啊，那个比以往任何时候都密集。但是越是那种时候，知道今天要停战了，你战士相反你很高兴。到了这个9点正，突然的全线静下来了。
As the Korean conflict draws to a close, another battle is slowly brewing. Further south, Vietnam is in the throes of an ideological war. Once again, China soon finds herself face to face with her Cold War enemy, the US. Vietnam, 1954. For 8 years, communist forces led by Ho Chi Minh wages an ideological battle with the French colonists and their surrogates, the Vietnamese National Army. The First Indochina War, as it's called, ended with the Geneva Accord. Vietnam is divided into two at the 17th parallel. North against South. In the north, the communist Viet Minhs take charge. In the south, the government of Ngo Dinh Diem, backed by the United States. The accord creates provisions for an election in Vietnam within 2 years. But peace doesn't last long. When elections fail to take place, Vietnam falls into another civil war. Mao, still reeling from the Korean War, doesn't want to be involved in another proxy fight with the West. But in early 1963, Mao's attitude towards Vietnam shifts. One reason: the split in the communist world.
Vietnam became a battleground for the two communist countries to compete, to gain control.
When Stalin died, Nikita Khrushchev seizes control of the Politburo, the governing central communist body. Khrushchev sets about implementing policies that deviate from the Stalinist ways.
Khrushchev began to criticize Stalin's policy and even describe Stalin as a dictator. Mao could not accept that.
Mao feels it's an attack not just on Stalin, but on himself.
Beijing believed that China maintained the communist principle, while Soviet Union betrayed those principles because Khrushchev made changes. That's why Mao called Khrushchev revisionist.
Mao criticizes Moscow's lack of support for revolutionary movements around the world. And to prove his point, he advocates stronger support for Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam. This will bring China once again face to face against America. 5th of July, 1965. Mao agrees to dispatch engineering and artillery troops to help the North Vietnamese. One artilleryman who's sent to Vietnam is Wu Zhenjai.
我65年1月应征入伍，当时的部队啊是空军高炮1师。实际上啊，在我们66年11月3号，我们头一仗啊，这美国飞机啊，基本上都是天气好、天高云淡的时候来轰炸的目标。像我们空军高炮这3级炮是用肉眼去看飞机，你眼睛都看不到飞机，你打不了。当时啊，打飞机啊你也开火，他也开火，具体打掉的飞机啊也不清楚是哪个连队、哪个炮。当时我们在全市来说一共打了59架飞机。
China's participation in the Vietnam War is less direct than the battles in Korea. For one, Mao's soldiers don't wear Chinese military uniforms.
当时我们出国呀，把国内的军装全部换掉了，就发的什么衣服啊，都像工厂的工作服一样。帽子呢，也没有军帽，就是盔帽。 也在它像越南那个战士那盔帽基本上一样。
Artillerymen like Wu aren't the only soldiers. Another 100,000 engineering troops are dispatched to build roads and highways.
铁道兵、工程兵啊，他们都是干活。这个修铁道，哪点铁道坏了，他不是总炸呼吗？他们修。 被铁道炸坏了，他们那个想着修去。
Mao's confrontation against the Americans during the Vietnam War is, however, a complex issue. It isn't always a battle of communists against capitalists. When the Viet Cong leaders begin courting Soviet Union, Mao feels betrayed.
The relationship between Maoist China and Ho Chi Minh's North Vietnam was mutually supportive, but it is also full of tension because Maoist China tried to impose some of these key policies on North Vietnamese movement. China trying to tell North Vietnamese communists that you need to engage in land reform movement in your countryside to eliminate landlord class and also to eliminate the rich peasant class. But the Vietnamese were not happy with that.
In 1968, against Mao's advice, the Vietnamese launch an all-out attack on US forces on the Viet New Year Tet. This is known as the Tet Offensive. More than 40,000 troops are killed in a series of concurrent air and ground attacks. Mao's relationship with Vietnam and USSR is now on a different course. The stage is set for a new act in the Cold War. In the shadow of the ongoing ideological war between the US and China in the 1960s, China's relationship with neighboring Vietnam is changing. The first signs of disharmony appear over the role of Chinese troops in Vietnam.
Mao suggested People's War, mobilize the peasants and farmers, build up defense. But Moscow believed in offensive campaign. So more and more North Vietnam moved away from China and closer to Moscow in 68 and 70. That's the beginning of the breakup or divorce between China and Vietnam.
In 1969, Mao withdraws all of China's troops from Vietnam.
In order to protect the China against Soviet Union, the Chinese leader began to work on the new alternative, a new approach toward international crisis.
Mao utters publicly the Chinese proverb, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." In April 1971, a window of opportunity appears from a seemingly apolitical event. A table tennis world championship tournament held in Nagoya, Japan. After one of the competitions, American player Glenn Cowan accidentally boards the wrong bus and is in the company of the Chinese team. While all of the Chinese players smiled, none approached him, except for Chinese ping pong champion Zhuang Zedong. The two strike a conversation and are friendly with each other, all caught by the media. Millions in China and the US follow closely as the event unfolded. In Beijing, Mao monitors this seemingly innocent exchange. The next day, Mao gives the approval to extend an invitation to the American table tennis team to visit China.
Ping pong diplomacy sounds like, just a small incident, but actually it happened because of China was ready for such an event. Those small events seems also happened accidentally, involved only a few individuals, but they would just be the right person in the right place. So now, door was open.
On the 21st of February 1972, Nixon visits Beijing, the first time for an American president. For Mao, it's an affirmation of China's arrival on the international stage. 2 decades of confrontation and antagonism with America finally gives way to a new era of dialogue.
Mao, as a Chinese leader, was not only a visionary, idealist, but he also was a realistic, always considered China's security and interest.
It takes the US and China another 6 more years before full diplomatic relations are established. But on that late winter day of 1972, the seeds are planted. Mao's Cold War with the US is coming to an end. For so long, China has seen itself as a nation under siege by imperialist forces. The Cold War has been instrumental in shaping and molding the world view of the Chinese people. Now, emerging out of those decades of conflict and tension is a China that is ready to take on a new role.